Hey everyone, Panyo here. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of After Dinner Mints. I highly encourage everyone watching to join us in the Art Blocks Discord. A link to our Discord can be found in the description of this video. As always, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss an episode of our weekly show. And now, once introduced, our guest for this afternoon, we have generative artist Jess Hewitt.
Hi there.
Hey Jess, how's it going today?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for being on After Dinner Mints. Been a huge fan of your work, and I remember doing our pre-drop talk. I think this was a couple, obviously a few months ago regarding Haywire Cafe, which we'll talk about lately. But yeah, I'd love to kick things off, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I'm a self-taught programmer. I don't have a formal art background, and my work experience is kind of all over the map. I've done IT support, indie game development, human resources, and retail management.
Wow. Okay. Great. And I'm curious, yeah, I know you're talking about all the different work you do. Like, who are some of the artists that kind of inspired you early on to, when you were starting to create art?
Well, I would say my family has everybody in my family is creative, and I was encouraged from the time I was very small to express myself creatively, and so it's just always been a thing that I've done as a hobby normally. So up until pretty recently, I hadn't tried to do art as a profession.
And are there any places you went for, the inspiration? Did you go to like museums, or was it like the influence from your family's work, their creative side?
It was definitely the influence from my family. Growing up, I grew up in Pittsburgh. There's the Carnegie Museum, which has a fantastic art museum with Andy Warhol stuff. Andy Warhol's from the area, and that was inspirational to me. And I get a lot of inspiration from nature, patterns in the clouds and water, trees, things like that. So,
Excellent. And,
yeah.
obviously we're in this crazy NFT crypto space. What was your introduction to the space, and did it initially click instantly, or is it something that kind of took a little bit of time for you to, totally understand it?
I got into crypto in 2017. I had heard about it, and I thought it was really interesting. So I got a little bit of Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Litecoin, and just held on to it for a while. And I didn't hear about. Well, no, I heard about crypto kitties at the time, but I didn't understand. It was like, what? I got on Twitter in April of 2020, and I saw more and more people, more and more artists talking about crypto art, and I was really excited about it, and I wanted to be a part of it. I still don't know that I fully understand it.
Yeah, I think a lot of us don't fully understand it, but it's something that, I feel like a lot of people are really supportive of one another. So I think it's one of those things where we're all kind of feeding off each other. And I don't know, it's just great to see so many artists, come together and build this space. And, for the Art Blocks platform itself, how did you learn about the art blocks, and did you know that you wanted to launch a project on there right away, or is it something you wanted to see some projects roll out and kind of go from there?
I was very excited about Roblox. I think I heard about it from Twitter, and but I didn't feel ready. I hadn't thought in long form yet. So my process was to create single pieces. I wasn't even really thinking in series at the time. So each piece was kind of a standalone thing. And then I started to get more of a sense of these are connected. Let's make a series of connected ones, but they were individual and curated. And there's a difference in process between even doing that and having a long form project where every output has to be good. While I'd heard about Art Blocks right away, I didn't feel ready to launch a project on there until early this year. So
And was it and I know we'll talk about Haywire Cafe in just a moment, but was it something where you were working on, you had like some projects that you're kind of like tinkering with already, or is it something where you learned about art blocks and you're like, hey, let's start something from scratch?
yeah, the project for Art Blocks was created specifically for Art Blocks.
Cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And can we see some? I always love like seeing early work from people before they launch stuff on the blockchain. But yeah, do you mind if we see some of your early generative art pieces to kind of get an
Sure.
idea of the progression of your art?
Certainly. So this, can you see?
Yeah, I see it right now.
Okay. So when I was a kid, we got an Apple IIe, and my very first generative piece was I kind of recreated it recently. It did this, just made different colored lines. So this was maybe 1984, probably the very first
Wow.
generative type thing I tried to do. And then a little later, this is maybe 2017 for these guys. Um, so I started off trying to make, I was thinking in terms of like textures for procedural textures for video games
Hmm.
and background patterns. So that's what I started with. And then when I got on Twitter, I saw these amazing GIF artists, Hexiosis and Pie Slices and Bees and Bombs, and that kind of inspired me to get into these like psychedelic animations.
Yeah, it seems like you really gravitate towards, not interactive, but just animated, moving, kind of pieces. Is that something where, you kind of started that early on, or is it, maybe something that kind of influenced you later on?
No, it's something I've been doing for a while, and I'm trying to make more static stuff now. But it's hard when it's hard to not animate it
Yeah,
for me. So
that's awesome. And what were, some of your early influences when creating these specific pieces? Were these like influenced from, like you said earlier, from your family and going to the Carnegie Museum?
yeah, so I actually got my mom was a crochet artist, and so this picture in the middle is some of her crochet work, which it just really dawned on me that she was making kind of generative art stuff with crochet. Um,
That's awesome. No, I think that's
yeah,
are these pieces that you currently hold yourself, or like the
no,
crochet pieces?
she created and sold crochet patterns. She passed away last year, but
Mm.
she actually was, I don't know, fairly popular in the crochet world for her Afghan patterns of these elaborate blankets.
Oh, that's awesome. And to
Yeah,
kind of show the progression of your art on the blockchain, are you able to share with us, your first ever NFT that you minted?
sure. So here it is. This was Sunset in the Shmoo Continuum. I minted this on OpenSea in May of 2020, and at the time, OpenSea did not have the friendly minting user interface, and I'm not entirely sure that I did it correctly. They didn't sell. It was I said made a collection of 5 here, and you can see the collection too.
And
And so I transferred them to an archive wallet, but so that was my first attempt.
that's awesome. And did you know right away which pieces you wanted to use, or is this something where it took a little bit of time and I don't know, some people are different where they're just like, I just want to test it out and see, like, I don't know, just put something on the blockchain and just try it out and then go from there? Or did you have like it well thought out?
I did not have it well thought out. I was making a bunch of things like this at the time, and I picked 5 of the best ones and thought I was just gonna try this and see how it went. But it was educational. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sure, like you said, the user interface for, putting some of this art up there and on OpenSea was challenging. Has it, do you think the space has just accelerated like super quickly to kind of just, make things easier for artists and for collectors alike?
Absolutely. It is so much easier now. Really
And,
polished interfaces. It's yeah.
and I'm curious to know, like, is there anything you think that needs to be improved? Or, I feel like we're still kind of like in these early stages of, you know this NFT crypto space, and do you think there's still a lot of like really big challenges ahead as far as, I don't know, maybe sometimes people say like for collecting, for instance, it's really challenging because you have to get a wallet and then you have to learn how to purchase something. Like, what are ways you think that we can make things easier, or OpenSea or some of these platforms can make it easier for collectors?
Yeah, I think that is a major problem. I'm sure there are people who are interested in purchasing art, but they're scared off by the whole process of having to understand crypto, get a wallet, and connect it to websites. And I'm not sure. Maybe a guide, a really thorough guide,
Hmm.
stepping through each step of the process for would be helpful.
Yeah, I think the education component of, just getting people to, like you said, just kind of getting that wallet, minting something, or purchasing something, there needs to be some kind of thorough guide for people to kind of like guide them through, each step. Um, I do want to talk about your Haywire Cafe project, which I truly love on the Art Blocks platform. Um, yeah, I've just kind of learned a little bit about the concept behind that project first off.
Okay, so the concept was I was kind of inspired by cartoons from my childhood and a kind of surreal, uh, zany sort of feel.
Hmm.
So that's what I was trying to create.
And are there any specific, cartoons that inspired you, or was it just kind of, whatever was on the Saturday morning, lineup of that day?
Oh, it was especially Chuck Jones cartoons, the Roadrunner, the Tom and Jerry of that era, Duck Dodgers, and then the Looney Tunes ones that he was responsible for, and then stuff like Dr. Seuss,
I love it.
just
Yeah.
with a really kind of mind bendy sort of feel for that time period.
Hmm. Definitely. And Haywire Cafe. I'm curious to know what the meaning of the project name is.
Also, we're going to talk about Noise Deck later. Noise Deck's the generative art app that I have co-written, but there's a module called Haywire in it that makes the distorted patterns. So
Hmm.
that's where Haywire came from. And then cafe, the checkered pattern kind of reminded me of like a tablecloth in a cafe. So I was thinking kind of like a cafe in another dimension or something. You're just, in a another world.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Especially no, I'm thinking of like, the Looney Tunes and even maybe like Animaniacs and stuff. It's just kind of like this
Yeah,
crazy space, but yeah, they have a place for them like all to get together. I love that.
right.
And the patterns for Haywire Cafe, like how did you determine like which patterns to use? Are they based off of maybe the crochet work, from your mom, or is this kind of just based off of, several different things?
Well, the Haywire module for Noise Deck uses these patterns and some more patterns. The other patterns that it uses didn't always look good. So there's, while you're creating a long form project, there's a process of weeding out the things that don't reliably make good patterns. And I had to not include all the ones that would have potentially been interesting.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And as far as the color palettes are concerned for this project, I think there's such a nice variety, and you really execute the colors really well. And I'm curious to know, like, how do you go about selecting color palettes?
So these are procedural color palettes. They're made using this cosine system. So it's just four sets of numbers that tell the red, green, and blue channels how to fluctuate over time. So there's a smooth continuation. If you looped it, it would just loop seamlessly. Um, the thing about this project is the way that the colors worked. I had to be very particular which palettes that I chose because not all of them gave the drop shadow looking effect. So I had to eliminate about half of the palettes that I have and just go with the ones that gave the look that I was shooting for there.
Hmm. That's great. And are there any meaning for the actual palette names? When you were naming them as features, was there any meaning behind the actual names themselves?
Not really. I tried to pick like a single word that kind of gave you the vibe of that palette. I would
And
have
do you
liked
have
to
an
have done cartoon sounding names for them, like
yeah.
Zing, but
Well, maybe for the next project, I think
right,
that's definitely an opportunity right there. Um, well, there is a feature that I was curious about because I wasn't sure what it meant. Is the Dusty feature? Can you tell us
right.
a little bit about what that means and what we can look out for in a specific mint to identify that?
So Dusty is a very small chance of creating like a small amount of speckles on the final image, and it's done right at the post processing phase of it. It's really subtle, so and I think only 6 of them have it.
Hmm.
So, because there's a dither on it, it's kind of hard to notice it. But if you look really closely at the places that would normally not have a lot of dithering, then it's speckled there. So it's
Interesting.
subtle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. No, that's cool. I'll have to definitely kind of zoom in and take a look at some of these mints. How do you prefer the actual art to be displayed? I think everyone's obviously just a little bit different. Maybe it's print or digitally, sometimes projection. Do you have like a preferred method for the specific project?
I actually haven't seen it printed. I just ordered prints finally, so we'll see how it looks. I think, however, people enjoy it the most is how they should display it. Whatever
Great.
looks best to them.
Yeah. And what I'm curious to know, like, what are your thoughts on, just digital displays now and then? I mean, obviously, I think there's room for improvement, obviously, down the road, but, what are your thoughts on displaying the actual art? Because, I think a lot of people who are skeptical about like NFTs, like, well, how do I display or like, what are you going to do with like the actual piece themselves? And so, when you're talking about digital, frames, is that something where you embrace it yourself? Like, is that something that you know you see like in museums and gallery spaces being used for these projects down the road?
Yeah, I think that would be great. As more and more digital art is a thing, there's more 3D stuff, more animated things that just can't be shown in a as a in print format. So,
Hmm.
and
Definitely. And
I do have a Samsung frame, so
uh-huh.
it's pretty big for displaying art.
Nice. And do you do you test out your art on that frame before you launch something, or when you're kind of just envisioning what it'll look like outside of your computer?
No, but I really should do that. I should make use of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things where the technology is just continually change anyway. So it's like what's available now. I mean, even maybe like 6 months from now, it might be completely different because there's so many companies coming out with something. And yeah, I think it's obviously it'll be I think a pretty big market for, digital frames in the future.
Yeah,
And, I do want to talk about some of the mints that were either your favorites or maybe they kind of surprised you if you don't mind sharing those with us.
sure. So I've got let's see here. No, that's not it. Okay, these are my favorites. So the one on the top left with the checkers, this is in my mind when I think of this project, this is how I kind of envision it. So I think the early prototypes for it were based with this palette and either the checkers or stripes.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think they look particularly good. The
Yeah, and
the ones with the rings, I really love the way that they animate. It kind of gives me this like Outer Limits or Twilight Zone sort of feel that I really like.
I love it. Yeah, and I think obviously these are static images here, and I think these are just like a good example of how something where your project is animated, but then you can kind of potentially depending on the artist and what they prefer. I think there's definitely a way where people can have that single frame or maybe the image and use that as a print as well.
Absolutely.
And how did that print turn out? I know you were talking about just a little bit ago, like the prints themselves. Is that something that you want to offer down the road, or is this just like something you're kind of tinkering with to try out?
Oh, I would love to offer it down the road. I don't have a, because I've been working with animation, I haven't really been print focused, but starting to do more static stuff, or at least it's static by default and the animation is kind of optional.
Hmm.
So I would like to get a solid workflow going for print, but I don't currently have it.
Great. Yeah, maybe you can tell us a little about some of these other yeah, these other mints over here. Is there anything in particular that you like about? I know you mentioned the rings, like maybe that bottom middle one. I believe is that 202 potentially.
That is yes.
Yeah, I
So
think the
that,
contrast in colors. But yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
oh no, that's fine. So the noise in the foreground is a curl noise, and so when it gets randomized, it gets scale, and that determines like how blobby or kind of stringy it is. And I had to eliminate some of the lower end ones where it was more blobby, but I felt like sometimes it did really interesting stuff. And this one is probably on the lower end of the more blobby, less stringy. And I just like that it's like a little less busy than the other ones. You know what I mean? It's a little
Yeah.
more.
There's a little bit more focus, I think, especially on that red, because it has like that contrast in colors, but then also it's yeah, that bigger blob on the right side kind of has like a little bit more of a focal point, I think, on the piece.
Yeah, yeah.
And what about the bottom right one? Is there anything that kind of caught your attention from that piece?
I think it's the contrast on that one too. Uh, that these ones, the ones with the sphere, are kind of better animated. I feel
Hmm.
because it gives you really the sense of like a weird sun, maybe with some weird clouds.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. And and the bottom left, I think that one's kind of a standout from the group because of the palette kind of it's a little bit more monotone, I guess, where it's just like red and what is it, like a black. So was that like uncommon, or is that something that kind of surprised you?
well, that palette is it's kind of an orange to purple gradient,
Hmm.
and it's a little lower contrast than some of the other ones. And I wasn't sure if I should put it in there, but I really like it. And I think it does really, when you compare it to the other higher contrast palettes, it does kind of stand out.
Yeah, definitely. And something I'm always curious about when talking to artists is, have you ever thought about before NFTs and this crypto space? Have you ever thought about collecting art in sets? Because I know there are collectors in our space that do that, and specifically for your project, is that something you ever considered or think about now?
I do think about it now. When making Haywire Cafe, I didn't realize that was a thing. And I think Proper is a collector who made a set using
Hmm.
the palette on the top right there, the Haze palette, which I also used on the Haze series, which is on Foundation. And so these palettes used in Haywire Cafe, I've also used in other things. So it is entirely possible to build sets with them. And in the future, that will be something I keep in mind.
Yeah, and would you ever even consider, now talking about sets, would you ever consider collect or creating sets between projects if you launch another project in the future, having them, some people do like triptychs where it's like maybe one piece from one project's in the middle and then two from the outside or from another project. Is that something you'll think about with, especially like the color palettes? I think that's obviously an easy way to create sets.
Absolutely, I will be thinking of like, instead of each project as a standalone thing, kind of my work as a whole, and how
Hmm.
it can be, there can be connections made between different series.
Great. And I do want to talk about these generative toys, noise deck that you've created. But before we do that, I'm kind of curious as far as future projects. Is it something that are you currently working on anything right now that you hope to potentially launch in the near future, or is that something you're kind of you'll explore later on in the year?
I would like to get 2 or 3 more long form projects out this year. have some ideas. I don't have anything to really show at this point. So I'm kind of in an experimental phase.
Hmm.
And I want to do something that's different from Haywire Cafe and different from the last project that I released, Divergent Convergence, which is on FX Hash.
Great.
So not only another good quality long form project, but also a kind of departure from the stuff that I've done recently. So
Great. And when you're thinking about like these future projects, is it do you gain inspiration by that the previous work that you mentioned from your mom, but then also museums, or do you kind of, when you're trying to think about a different approach, do you look for other ways to get inspiration?
So inspiration can come from anywhere. It can surprise you. You just be walking along and there it is, right? But,
Yeah.
I like to experiment a lot. I feel like I kind of work intuitively, and that for me it works best to just try to make a bunch of different things, and then I'll just know it when I see it. So
Hmm.
so a lot of experimentation.
Great. Well, yeah, I really look forward to seeing what other projects you come out with later this year. But yeah, I do want to talk about these generative toys that you've kind of created. I know you have a website. Do you mind telling us a little bit about this website and what is Generative Toys?
Sure. So Generative Toys is a company that my partner Alex and I co-founded last year. We create a generative art web application called Noise Deck. The company was built to support Noise Deck and any future creative applications we want to make in the future. So
That's awesome. Cool. And I know you said you started it last year. Is this something where you would potentially, team up with other people to, host their applications as well, or is this something where the two of you are currently just working on building it out yourself?
we had hoped to start looking for funding and hiring people this year, but the market is just not cooperating with us in that
Yeah.
regard. So it's just the two of us for now. We do have we want to take Noise Deck and make a more robust desktop application. There
Mhm.
are some limitations to making a web application as far as the size of the output and memory usage and things like that that we would like to get around. So that's in the works. And we also would like to have kind of like a suite of creative tools. So besides just Noise Deck, maybe something to do sound or focus more towards VJ type stuff.
Oh, nice. That's awesome. Yeah, that's cool. I really look forward to, seeing that progress over time. And would you mind actually showing us? I've checked out and toyed around on the website on Noise Deck, but to show some of the, sliders and effects, are you able to, share that with us?
Sure. So this is Noise Deck. The premise of it is these are modules. These things on the left here, and there are two generator modules. They make a pattern or noise, and then there's a mixer that combines them, and then one or two post processing modules. So here I'll show you. Well, let's turn this off so you can see. Here is
Oh, wow.
Haywire.
Yeah.
So this is where the Haywire portion of Haywire Cafe came from, and you'll see that here's the different patterns that are, and some of them these hexagons did not make it in. This one didn't make it in, but so what you do with this is you can zoom in and out. You can skew them so they're like that. You can rotate the patterns, and then here combining it with another one. You can add. We've got presets too, so you can check out those. And a good way to work with it is either just randomize the settings a lot, and then once you get close to something that you like, tweak the individual settings or start from one of the presets.
Wow, I really like that piece actually that's just on there right now. It has like a really psychedelic, look to it.
It's like a sweater from the 1980s.
Yeah, especially the colors that definitely just give it that like extra pop, which I think is really cool. And for people that toy around with the different parameters using these tools, is it something where they can save it themselves and use it, or like how does that work?
Yeah, so you can save a preset. So this here is the preset saving menu. You just give it a name and you can save it. You can also export a static image or a GIF or a video, and you can do MP4 or WebM, I think. So there are some limitations as to like the resolution and size that GIF especially it just end up with a huge file, which is part of the reason we want to create a desktop version that's a little more robust.
That's cool. I love how you're kind of showing the different layers, so that first layer is basically kind of Haywire Cafe, and then each one that you kind of added like this really cool element. Is this something where you're going to add on to this specific project right here that you're showing us, or is it something where this is the finished product and as it is right now?
Oh well, we're still working on it. It's been kind of on the back burner. I've been really busy with art projects this year, and I haven't given it the attention I would like to. But we are still working on it. I've got um, some additional modules that are partially finished that I need to wrap up and get checked in. But we're constantly working on it, and definitely have ideas for more modules.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And what's the name of the website where people can go to use the site that you're sharing with us right now?
So if you go to noisedeck.app, Pro is the paid version, but there's a free version at just noisedeck.app, which I'll. It's a little more limited than the Pro version. So there are less modules.
And if they use like the paid version and they create something they really like, are they able to like print it out themselves? Are they able to use it in some commercial capacity, or what are the limitations, or what do you want to allow people to do with it?
Oh, the Pro version is completely unlimited as to what you do with the output of it. The free version, you are allowed to use commercially up to, I think it's $25,000 a year.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I do want to talk about a little bit about some of your other projects on the jesshewitt.art website. I know you have 3 specifically that I would love to talk about if that's something you're able to.
Sure.
The first project is the elves.
Yeah. So the elves were created with machine learning, and it's a workflow where you have a text-based prompt and it generates an image for you. And I think the prompt for these elves was something like mutating elves with extra eyes. And what I intended with extra eyes was for it to have more than 2 eyes, but what the AI interpreted that to mean was that they have one really big eye. But I thought it was great, and it's when you find a prompt that you reliably get interesting output from, it's kind of amazing. And that prompt, I was just able to make a whole bunch of these little guys, and so I put them on Foundation, and they have not really garnered a lot of attention on there. So I don't know if machine learning is maybe just too different from what I normally do to appeal to people who collect my work, but I love them. I love the elves.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious then, now that you're talking about, AI, is that something that you want to explore further, down the road and maybe incorporate into some of your other projects, or is this something that you're just kind of dabbling with right now?
I would say I'm at the dabbling phase. Although the latest project that I did, I used machine learning to get the palettes. So it generated images, and then I pulled colors out of those images to make the palettes for it.
Hmm.
And maybe for inspiration, I'm just not sure right now how to incorporate it into a generative art workflow because you can't do the machine learning stuff real time yet. So
Yeah. Great, cool. I'll definitely have to keep an eye on that. So another project I noticed on your website was the Hay series. Can you tell us a little bit about the concept and idea behind that project?
sure. So the Haze series was made with Noise Deck, and this is the beginning of me starting to really think in a series before it was like thinking in long form. So this was a curated, handpicked outputs from this particular algorithm, I guess. And I really like the palette, and the shape of the noise reminded me of like clouds, and the palette kind of a sunset. There was kind of like another kind of surreal sky thing, I guess, is what I was shooting for.
That's awesome. And the last project I wanted you to talk about, if you don't mind, was the fragmentation corruption project.
Right. So those were on Hicketnung, maybe fall of last year, shortly before Hicketnung shut down. And now they're on Taya. Taya is fantastic. The community led replacement for Hicketnung. Uh, these were also created using Noise Deck. I've got my own personal version of Noise Deck that has more modules that I've created that are kind of in an unfinished state, but
Hmm.
I can do more with them, and I have more palettes than are available even on the Pro version. So they're made with that, and the kind of thought pattern behind that was like a cyberpunk or Tron kind of thing, where you're inside a computer, or maybe in an abstract way, not literally like inside a computer, but what would it feel like to be really small and be in that world?
Yeah, I love that. Cool. Well, I love just seeing all the different projects that you're kind of working on your website, which is jesshewitt.art. Separately, I'm curious to know, like, are there any techniques or tools that you're hoping to learn and use for future projects? I know you kind of mentioned a couple of them already with like AI, you're just tinkering with other ideas, but is there any of them that, that you haven't mentioned that you really want to explore? And if so, like, why those specific tools?
I have been meaning to implement a reaction diffusion algorithm for a long time, and that creates a kind of organic noise that looks like coral or maybe microscopic cellular things. And the reason I haven't implemented it is it's a little tricky to do with a shader-based workflow because it kind of requires maintaining state, which is you don't really do in shaders normally. So,
Hmm.
but there are several. I've got kind of a vision for things I want to do with it. So that's something I want to implement. And I'm also working on ray marching or a 3D sort of workflow.
Great, cool. Well, that's all super exciting, and I'm happy to hear that you're exploring those different ideas and tools. What do you do in your spare time when you aren't coding a project, like outside of this crazy and fast paced NFT crypto world? Like, what are some other things that you're working on, or that you do just outside of the space?
Well, I do a lot of besides art stuff, like arts and crafts kind of things. I just got a sewing machine. I haven't sewn in a long time, but I'm gonna start doing that again. Needle felting. I've got a plotter.
Oh,
Plotter
nice.
might end up in my artwork flow though, but just fun stuff like that. And then I've got pet rats.
Oh, nice.
Uh, I made for them a car. I'll show you.
You made them a car?
I made them this little car. So I had read this article. This let's see, the psychology department of the University of Richmond did an experiment with rats where they made the little car like that for them, and then they taught them to drive it around to get a treat. And so like, oh, I have to do this, right? So they made an instructable for how to make the car. So I made the car and I tested it out with with my guys, and well, some of them like it, some of them don't.
So how does that work then? So they're inside of the car, and obviously, how do they get to the wheels? Is it just by like the movement of them moving to the front, and then the wheels kind of just force them to go in that direction?
So there's a metal plate on the floor of it, and then
Uh,
these copper wires. When they touch the wires and are making contact with the floor, it completes the circuit, and
oh wow.
that activates the wheels. So if they're touching the wires in the front, it makes the car go forward, and if they're touching the sides, it makes it turn. And the ones that were into it picked it up really fast. It really got a sense of,
Mm,
oh, when I do this, it makes the car go.
yeah.
And they're impressive little guys. The rats are very smart.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's super cool. That's awesome. And I noticed you mentioned, a pen plotter. Is that something where you would potentially release a project? I mean, there's a platform out there. I know Plottables. They do, plottable specific projects where people can just like plot them themselves if they have their own plotter. Would you, consider, doing a project like that in the future, or is that something that you're just, kind of using for fun?
At some point in the future, yeah, I've been doing a shader-based workflow, and so to work with plotters, you need to do SVG. So
Hmm.
my workflow for making SVG is just getting started here. So I'm not to a point where I can make an art quality output with it, but I would love to someday. Just
Yeah.
a matter
Wow.
of getting to that point. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, no, it's super exciting. So I know we kind of touched base on, future projects you have for the remainder of the year. Are there, any other projects or maybe exhibits or anything that you kind of have in store, or things that you want to do?
I don't have anything specific planned. I'm kind of playing it by ear for the rest of the year here.
Hmm.
We'll see what
Okay.
happens.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're just hitting the halfway mark. A lot can happen. So, no, I'm really looking forward to seeing, what kind of projects you put out for the remainder of the year. And I know, we've started seeing, people in the space that are, interested in being generative artists, but they aren't sure like where to start or what kind of resources to look into. Do you have anything or any recommendations on your end, maybe some books or websites that you recommend, to some of these aspiring artists?
I think P5.js, the JavaScript version of processing, is a great place to start. There's a lot of tutorials. It's very friendly to new people, and it's also, if you have an eye on eventually releasing a long form project, you're getting used to the way that you would do it right away,
Hmm.
because processing is something that you could easily use um, to create a long form project. Whereas if you use something like Python or another language, you can't have a web project with it. So good to get started with JavaScript. And then the Daniel Schiffman's videos on YouTube, very good
Yeah.
for new people, very friendly. If you're into shaders, the Book of Shaders, and 3D stuff, the Art of Code YouTube channel, excellent resource
Great.
for new people.
Cool. Well, yeah, we'll definitely have to include this in the show notes for this video. I think that's always just it's important for people to to hear what other artists maybe that they look up to or they're like hearing from to kind of just know how they got their start or where they go for resources. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. Um, Next off, I want to know like so. I always talk about this because I think it's super important. Is mental health in this space I think is really important and I think there's like conversation surrounding it, but I think it's always important for other people to hear what artists are doing. How do you wind down from a project? When you're working on or maybe like a project that's been fully minted, or even during the process of coding a project. Like, do you have any like I don't know rituals or things that you kind of do to kind of like get yourself in that Zen mind space?
I do have a meditation practice, and I feel like that is really helpful. Also, disengaging, turning the computer off, getting off social media, stepping away is really important.
Great. Cool.
Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing that. And then finally, like how can people reach you? Should they have any questions, maybe social media, also your websites? I'd love for you to share all that with people tuning in.
Sure. Yeah, I have a website is jesshewitt.art, and then Twitter, I'm Rusty Sniper _ on Twitter and Instagram. Rusty Sniper was taken. And let's see. Oh, I'm on Discord. Also, Rusty Sniper, I think, on Discord. So.
Okay, great. Well, Jess, thank you so much for being on After Dinner Minutes, talking about your project, your website, Noise Deck. I think is super interesting. And like I said, Haywire Cafe. It's such a great project on the Artblocks platform, and I'm really glad that you're able to talk to us about that today.
Well, thanks for having me. It was great to talk to you again.
Yeah. Likewise. So a couple news and notes on next week's pre-recorded After Dinner Minutes show, which will be released on July the 13th. We have generative artist William Mapan. So that'll be on July the 13th, which is on a Wednesday. Finally, we have a weekly newsletter that gets delivered once a week. It has information on upcoming drops, generative art related news. You can find a link to that newsletter in the description of this YouTube video. Again, I want to thank Jess Hewitt for joining me on After Dinner Minutes. It's so great having you on. I look forward to seeing what you build out for the rest of the year. For anyone tuning in, make sure you comment, like, and subscribe to the Artblocks YouTube channel so you don't miss an episode of our weekly show. Be kind to each other, buy what you love, and we will see you all next week. Thanks very much. Appreciate it, Jess.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.